I always carry a leader wheel with me. That's what I got my leaders on. And I'll spin up 20 of them at the beginning of the year. If I get one that's shot, I peel it off and I'm throwing that thing away. Baits, pencil plugs, Rapalas. I've heard guys run anywhere from F9 to F13 Rapalas. Typically, I am always just running an F11. There's never been a day when I'm whipping that I can't get them to bite this. As far as a boat layout goes, this is really easy, guys. I like having a rod holder, and I want that to be towards the bow from where I'm going to be standing while I'm fishing, but it's not necessary. The reason I like that is when your buddy gets a fish on, and you got to go help him land it, or you're going to take a little snooze, or whatever the case may be, you got somewhere to put that the fish isn't going to yank your rod in the water. The other thing, not mandatory again, is cleats for your anchor, so you can swing your anchor rope. That'll suck you in or out with the current. Not necessary, but it can be helpful. We're typically starting off with this whip fishing April, going until about November typically. I mean, that's the majority of the whole entire year, guys. As long as there's not ice out there, you can go out there and you can catch walleyes while you're whipping. Time of day, typically about a half hour before it gets dark until about a half hour after daylight. I mean, you've got that whole night period. There are times when the water gets super muddy, you can go out there at noon and pound them because it simulates that darkness, and you get that sun starts breaking through and them fish will go crazy. The way I'm setting up my rod, like I said, I got that braided line coming down. I'm tying that off to a 3-way swivel here. Off the bottom of my 3-way, I'm running a lighter fluorocarbon monofilament, whatever I got laying around. Typically this is something in the 8 to 10 pound test range, something like I said, it's laying in my house. If I ever do snag my sinker, I want to lose my 50 cents and not all my plugs with it. Off the other end of my 3-way, just go to my leader wheel, pull off a leader, clip the plug on it, and I'm sending that baby in the water until I come up to my next set of snaps. Okay? Opening these up, and as you can kind of see in that diagram on the paper you guys got handed out, we're running these things in series. I call it piggybacking. I personally always run 3. I know guys that run 1, 2, 4. You can get all the way up into that stuff now with the 3rd rod you can run. Like I said, I run 3. That's what's always worked for me. I always run a pencil plug up front, a pencil plug in the middle, and a pencil plug on the end. Once in the blue moon, I've played with putting a Rapala in the middle and a Rapala on the end, and just make sure you got the nice swivels. That's how I learned that those are the swivels to use. If you use something cheaper, I've always ended up with a big ball when I pulled it in and my 2 Rapalas stuck together. My first pencil plug is almost always the ugliest son of a gun I got in the box. And the reason that is because I never used to be able to catch a fish on the front plug. And once I started running some nasty, ugly stuff, I would actually start catching a couple fish a night on that front. I've run the natural stuff and all that. For me, it's always something ugly. My middle bait and my last bait, I typically am running something natural unless the water is really dirty. Purples, pinks, chartreuses, my Rapalas, and you guys can come up and look here afterwards. I literally brought 12 baits, and I would feel comfortable going out almost any day of the week and fishing those 12 baits, and I'm going to foot fishing them all. You don't got to reinvent the wheel, guys. I mean, you find what works for you, and typically you can catch fish every night on those baits. Clown Rapala, great bait. You can't beat it. On my rod, that's almost in the water first almost every night. If not that, it's typically a vampire. So we get our plugs fed out, we got them piggybacked, and it gets pretty easy. You're staying over side of the boat, guys. You got your plugs going there. You know, that's to the north, the current's coming this way. You're just letting this line down until you feel that thing hit bottom. Typically when you're first hitting bottom, the current's still going to pull you back. You're going to have to let line out until you kind of establish a bottom. So once you're hitting bottom, you're coming back, you feel the thump, you're just kind of pulling forward, guys. Let it back, you want to feel it hit bottom. Coming back forward. Me personally, about my 3rd or 4th time back, I want that sinker not to hit bottom. I want to work that thing back a little farther. Okay? I've had guys say, you know, they sit there and they just twitch it. I know guys that sit there and just reef it. What I've learned most talking to everybody and doing it and fishing with a bunch of guys is everybody develops their own unique action. And typically when you start catching your fish and you start doing really good is when you kind of zone out. You're sitting there having a conversation and it all goes back to natural instinct. Your brain takes you right back to how that ice has worked and how, you know, take some good memories of when you're actually getting that fish to thump it. Very rarely do I have to do anything other than just what naturally comes from my whipping motion.
How often do you do that? Is it almost constant?
Constant. I know a lot of people will sit down when they're whip fishing. Me personally, I'm out there to catch them. I'm not out there to kind of sit back and have a couple drinks and all that stuff. So I'm standing up. The side of the boat I'm typically fishing, I'd be like this, and I stand up the entire time. So you're constantly jerking, you're coming back, you're hitting bottom. Constantly jerking, coming back, hitting bottom. Like I said, with me doing that about every 3 to 4 times I want to lose bottom, I'm letting line out pretty fast. Grew up hand lining. Low man hates whipping. I'm covering water. If those fish aren't in the hole where I'm sitting at right now, I want to get back to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. If I work it back there about 250 feet and I haven't caught a fish, I'm reeling that stuff up, and especially if it's first thing in the night, I'm changing all 3 of those plugs. Typically by the second or third bait change, you found at least one thing that they're biting, and then you can key in on everything else around them. You know, if they're hitting a clown or pala, I'm going to put on the clown pencil plug in the middle. My front plug is still going to be something ugly. It might be something chartreuse that's ugly, but now I'm starting to develop a pattern. Also on that small topic, I've seen before where a middle plug and a front plug, if you start switching those around and the back one's working and it's working real good, sometimes those will just be calling that fish in. So if you're catching them at a pretty decent rate, leave a beat. You know, if you're pulling a fish every 10-12 minutes off of your rod, even if they're just hitting that one plug over and over and over, you're still doing something right. No point in changing it up at that point, breaking what's working. Once you guys get a fish on when you're doing this, I mean, don't have them to set the hook. You'll be coming forward and that fish will grab it typically. Sometimes you'll be back and it'll be just as you're about to come forward, you'll feel it. You don't have to reef on that thing, guys. We got little tiny hooks on here, and then fish are a long ways back. And everybody knows a walleye, as soon as they hit, man, their mouth is just open like you're catching a bass. There's a lot of current out there. Keep your drags fairly loose, and you guys just crank them slow. It's real easy. I use a really, really flimsy whipping rod. A lot of guys use them that are broomsticks. When I got a flimsy rod, hey, I'm out there to have fun when I'm fishing. And I get a 15-incher on here, it's a ball. When I get a 5-pounder, I got my hands full, like the rod is about to break. But that's what I'm there for. You take your time, you get them up. Once you get that 3-way up close to the boat, that's where my rod holder comes in. I'm setting that rod holder in there, or that in the rod holder, I'm reaching out and I'm grabbing that first line. Slow hand over hand, pull up to my first plug. If there's not a fish on there, you can either set it in the boat, or you can just let it keep floating in the water. Myself, I let it float in the water, and I want this tip of my rod to be right on the outside of my gunnel. That way, when I'm grabbing it, then once I get that first plug and he's floating right along the side of my boat, I can just kind of reach out a little farther to pull in that next one, and I create a loop in my line. Come up to the next plug, and if he's not on there, I just keep doing that same loop. I get this great big loop on my line, and I'm going to pull my walleye in, and he's going to be on the outside of my loop. Once I get him up close, I'm just grabbing that line, and I'm taking my time, and I'm flipping him in. I don't use nets very much. I got into that last year. I'm not a net fan. I don't like nets. You got a chance of 9 hooks getting tangled into that, and you're looking at about an hour and some odd tangle you're trying to get out of there. I'm not dealing with it. If I lose a little 14-inch walleye, that's cool. I can go back to the dock not having a limit and still have a very successful night. You get that fish in the boat, get the fish off the plug as fast as you can. Let him flop around the bottom boat. He's not going to hurt nothing. Take that first plug, flip that back out there, and you're just going to let your line float along as the current pulls your first plug. Get to your next plug. Get that, make sure everything's nice and situated. Your snaps aren't cockeyed, your plug's laying good in the water. feed it out. Get to the last, which would be your front plug. Same thing, clean it all up, make sure everything's pristine. You got a little piece of weeds on there, pull it off, take your time, make sure all that stuff's right. Set it out, go back to fishing. When you're going out there, guys, places to look for whip fishing, just go putz along in the river, somewhere between 16 to 24 foot of water. And if you're heading due south, all you're watching for is you're watching for that bottom to dip. See, this way you can kill two birds with one stone. You get going along and all of a sudden you see that bottom dip, and it doesn't have to be a big dip. If it dips 2 feet, you know, if you're going 16, 16, 16, all of a sudden it's 18 and flattens out, and then comes back up to 16, that little pocket will hold fish. A little hole like that, you can pull a limit out of in a couple hours, most nights when the fish are here. Hit mark on your graph. Going along, find the next spot, hit mark on your graph. Just keep putzing along. The other things you can watch for is not only is the bottom your structure, you also got structure from shore. There's a lot of boat houses down there, old wood pilings that are kind of half submerged, which with the water level this year, they might actually be exposed finally. All that stuff provides a current break, and those walleyes will sit on the back side of it. And they'll hide there. They're all trying to ambush, the same way as with the dips in the bottom. They're sitting on the back side of that thing. They're sitting behind rocks, they're sitting behind all that stuff. And all they're waiting for is a minnow to come floating by or something to eat. So all of a sudden you come like this and he's watching you, and then all of a sudden you're letting that little bit of line out, and he's getting ready to snap it, and as soon as it starts coming forward, he's snapping at that thing. That's how you're catching your fish. Most nights, because I've played with this before, if you're catching them on a boat house and that's where it comes in and angles out, and right at that corners where they're biting, you can go to almost any boathouse on the river that night, and they'll be in that exact same spot. Be courteous to the other guys that are going to be out there. There are hundreds of guys doing this now. You know, the good spots, the old faithfuls, they're going to be stacked up 4 wide unless you're there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm not going to sit there for 5 hours to start fishing at 9. That's why I'm saying these little dips, yeah, those guys that are sitting there all day waiting to fish, they might get their fish in an hour and a half to get their limit, which is cool. As far as courteous goes, don't get too close to the guy. If you're going to stack up on the outside or the inside of them, don't get too close. The other thing is, guys, we've got to remember, we got these anchor ropes out. They're anywhere between 75 and 150 feet long. If you only anchor 300 feet ahead of the guy, once you get about 150 back, your line is in his anchor rope. The other thing about it is, and this is my personal opinion, if you can't beat them, you kind of join them. And that's kind of where the hand line and the whipping, in my opinion, come together. In the springtime, everybody's whipping, and that's very productive. It gets a lot of guys on the water that their boat really isn't the best for hand lining, or maybe they don't care to hand line at all. I'm not going to go out there and try and fight them, because the holes that they're anchored in, that's where I want to hand line at. So I'm just going to go out there and join them and whip with them. Now, come summertime, and it's really hand lining season, I'm not going to be the dick that goes out in the middle of all the hand liners and anchors up. Don't get me wrong, there's no rules against it. You can do whatever you want. It's that kind of that courtesy thing, and that's kind of always been an unwritten law. You don't anchor up in the middle of the guy's hand lining come July, and typically those guys don't come down in the river and try cutting you off while you're out whipping. Anybody got anything on this whipping? They got questions? Anything? Yes, sir.
Yeah, anchoring technique.
Me personally, my anchor rope's about 125 foot. Okay, what I do is I'm going to come up to my exact. I typically leave my GPS mark where I mark it when I'm out searching. That's the hole. I'll typically run to that spot, and I will come up. 125 is my anchor rope. It's going to take me about 50 to catch, so I'm out to about 175, and I want to be about 100 north of it, so I'm out 275. So close to a football field is where I'm going to drop my anchor to fish the hole that I just marked on the GPS. I'm going to come into my GPS mark that I've got, and I'm going to start going up to the north. At that point, that's where I'm starting to pay attention. Okay, is my wind coming out of my east? Is it coming out of my west, northeast, such and such? you want to be able to be in that depth of water where you mark that hole. There are nights that the difference of a width of a boat will make the difference in catching fish and not catching fish. You're just setting that anchor into the water and then letting your line out. Me, I don't have the luxury of having the all the cleats on the front of the boat. I got a little 16-foot, pretty much like a flat bottom kind of deal. So I'm hooking mine just to my front cleat, the same, or front loop that I'm going to pull that up on the trailer with. I'm letting all my line out typically. If I have to, I can cheat it up, but I don't like doing that because the way that it's pulling on the bow of your boat, you'll actually can dunk yourself. So since I don't have cleats on the front, I'm going to use my motor to swing the ass end of my boat around. It's not going to give me nearly as much swing as you would with the front cleats, but I can at least get a little bit. You don't want to take an anchor and throw it. It'll sometimes go backwards and catch backwards and catch in all kinds of funny positions. I've lost a few out there even doing it properly. There's pipes out there. I've looped them around pipes backwards. Had to go have divers go get them, all that fun stuff. Anybody else got any questions on the whipping stuff?
Yeah, how much, I'm sorry, go ahead. What's your leader length?
Yeah, I did forget that. That's a personal preference, again, in my book. I have experimented with probably 30 different variations of it. The typical, standard, old faithful is 6 foot, 6 foot, 6 foot. That's what these ones here are, 6 foot increments. I've run them as crazy as 8, 16, and 25. And that's in feet. That's actually typically my favorite way to run them. I had a gentleman who talked to a diver, blah, 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 told me, when all your leaders are the exact same length in between baits, all your plugs have the same action. And the part that made the most sense of it to me is, if your leader is 6 foot, when you're letting it back and you're jerking it up, and you're letting it back and you're jerking it up, you're covering an area in the water about that big. Your plug might be up here one time, down here one time, over here one time. As that gets longer and longer, now you're covering this much water. So if my hole's over here, and this is here, and I got a little bit of stained water, and I just keep punching this little hole over here, the fish isn't seeing it. Now if all of a sudden I'm punching here, and then I'm coming over here, I got a lot better chance of my fish seeing my bait, which that increases my odds of being able to catch them.
On your whipping?
Yep.
How often you let it out, and how much do you let out when you're whipping?
Typically, I'm wanting that, like I was saying, every 3 to 4 times that I go back to feel that sinker hit bottom, I want to lose bottom, which is going to let me let line out. 4 to 5 feet typically is what you're letting out at a time. If you do get back to a spot and you're going, man, there's something here, a big rock, I can't get over it, whatever the case is, because I used to have a rod with Dacron just for those instances. If you let out about 15 feet of line, even though the sinker's sitting in one spot, you'll get a great big loop in your power pro. You let that current grab it, you just hold that rod high and you snap it, and you'll actually hop that sinker over top of your rock or your log or whatever you're hung up on.
Is whipping more strictly for the river, or you guys whip up here in the mouth of the lake?
Once you get very far up in the, I've had guys that I know whip up at the Coast Guard. I've had guys that I know whip up at Paper Mill. The Coast Guard now has turned into a zoo, and good luck getting a spot. I used to whip that back before anybody else did, and it was really nice.
South of the Coast Guard
You're going to be a little bit north of it. And I used to do it, it was nice because I was working for Joel in here, I'd get out of here at 9, I could hook up on the boat, I could go out there, it'd be 11 o'clock. There's nobody up there. By far is not one of the greatest holes that there is on the water, but it's productive. I pulled a lot of limits out of there. Once it got more popular, obviously those fish get dwindled out of there a lot faster, and it's just like every hole on the river. The paper mill, you guys are all big boys, do what you want. I'm not anchoring up down there. That current is ripping. The structure that's down there is gonna, you got a really good chance of hanging your anchor up. I know a guy that sunk his boat there. You get a freighter that comes in there and draws all that water, that becomes a standstill real quick, and it doesn't take long, and I've seen it. I've been out there bass fishing in that area without an anchoring, and that freighter will turn your boat 180. You do that, you get your motor stuck in that line, dude, you're going down, and it's not worth it over a fish to me. I fished a handful of other ones, gold caps, red caps, shalers, Riviera's got one. These are dependable, they don't break on me. I don't have any issues with them, never have. Take care of them, they'll take care of you kind of deal. Price point on any manufactured one is always about the same, so why not use one that I know is gonna work. You always wanna have a backup reel with you guys. If there's 2 of you on the boat, you wanna have 3 reels on the boat. If you do happen to break your line off, it's kind of a pain to try and fix that out on the water. You're a lot better off just going and grabbing another reel, throwing it on the boat, and away you go again. Your backup reel, I don't care what kind of reel it is. Whatever you can find on eBay in a garage sale for 30, 40 bucks, as long as it works, great for a backup. Chances are you should only have to use it once a year for one night. This is what they call a shank when you're hand lining, guys. This is what we briefly talked about. Some guys will run these when they're whipping so they can change their height. I like these adjustable height ones instead of me having a whole bunch of different sets in there. So what happens is I go out and I go out the next night and I forgot what ones I ran them on the night before. This way it's pretty stupid easy. I only got a couple choices. I run a little bit of a different main line than pretty much anybody else runs that I know of. There's 3 different kinds of line that guys will use when they're hand lining. We'll run a coated, which is what comes on the reels when you buy them new. There's an uncoated, which is a twist. We run a single strand. There's no wrap in there or anything like that. It's a single strand of wire. It's a little bit more costly than the other stuff is. But it cuts through the water really nice. And to be honest with you, it lets me get away with about a ½ pound sinker lighter than what everybody else is using. I'm not out there 7 nights a week. If I fish 2 to 3 nights in a row hand lining, that's typically a Friday night, a Saturday night, and a Sunday night. I'm done. I can do that with this wire. If you're a guy that's got the time and you're going to be out there 7 days a week, this wire will beat the snot out of your hand. But it's great stuff because instead of pulling around the 2 pound sinker, I'm pulling around a 1.5 pounds. It makes a big difference on feel, and I'm not wearing out my arm nearly as fast. How I'm setting up myself is I run 12-pound test Mason hard type leader line which will be from my shank towards my bait. I come up to a small ball bearing swivel. I tie myself on about a 4-foot section of fluorocarbon. This Mason stuff is real thick, it's real stiff, it's really nice stuff to work with. Once again, that fluoro is great. When I'm hand lining, I like having that little bit of fluoro, helps me out a lot of nights when the fishing's tough. It's great stuff, it's a little bit expensive, it's worth it, guys. The reason I don't run that little swivel in between when I'm whipping is because I would have like 20-some knots in one strand of lines. Here I'm only adding a couple knots. I'm pretty confident with my knots. I don't have an issue with that. So, when I'm out hand lining, when I'm getting set up, as you can see, all our lines going inside of our reel. I don't really know anybody else that's been doing that. They all got a bead on there which stops their wire from going inside. I get out there, I unclip my first snap here, hook on a plug, throw that baby out in the water. My first one out is always going to be my 15-foot leader. I run a 15 and a 30. Guys will run a 20 and a 40. 15-30 works for me. It's less line I got to pick up to get the fish in the boat. Less time, better chance I got to land them. Hook that end of there to the bottom on my shank. There's a little diagram there. You can see the shorter ones going on the bottom. Undo my snap here, put my second plug on, toss that baby out in the water, let out my 30 feet leader. And I'm going to clip that to the top lead on my shank. Now my wire that's coming out of my hand line reel is gonna get snapped.
Those lines won't get tangled up. You're going back like that?
No, they typically don't. When I take my short one and I just run that back, it's gonna go straight behind my boat. When I take my second one, once I get about 8-10 feet of it out there, I typically will kind of flip it off to the side of the boat. So it's 4 feet there. As long as I can pull a line out of here fast enough, by the time it swings behind it, it's farther back. Okay. So I got my shank on here. I'm gonna have my 30-foot lead on my top, and I'm gonna have a 15-foot lead on the bottom. When you're putzing along or wherever you're wanting to fish, you guys can fish the river, you can fish the lake, take your pick. I fished them both. In the summertime, just because everybody's up in the lake, doesn't mean you can't go in the river and catch fish, guys. A lot of times I'll go in the river, I don't want to deal with the pack that's up here. When I was younger, there was 6 of us that went out there, 6 boats every night. We were all together, everybody worked together. Now you look out there, it looks like you got Christmas lights going on. I mean, there's 50 to 100 boats on a Friday night. When it gets like that, I don't want to be out there with everybody, trading paint. I'll go suck down in that river, fish the same holes, the same structure stuff that you're fishing in the springtime for whipping that we talked about. That's where the fish are holding. Nice thing with the hand lining, you go into a hole a couple times and you're not catching a fish, go up to the next one. What I'm doing is, I've got my 2 leaders on here. My top leader, I'm going to throw that over top of my shoulder anytime that I'm not having it in the water fishing. By fishing, I mean my sinker down, going deeper down in the water. What that does is that, like what you're saying, that swings that, so I got a couple feet apart. So typically I'm not going to tangle. Go ahead, I'm going to let my sinker down, and that sinker's going to pull my wire out until that thing hits bottom. Running your wire, you're going to run that through the palm of your hand, and I use my pointer finger just like it's the tip of my fishing rod. Okay? When I'm hitting bottom and I'm trolling along, I'm going to have this reel up ahead of me. Realistically, on my boat, I'm about sitting here, and that would be about where my reel's at. And you're just coming back with letting the sinker weight take you. You're coming forward, pulling it forward. You're letting it back, you're hitting bottom, coming forward. Same thing with the whipping. Everybody kind of finds their own little method, tactic that works for them, for how they're working that. We've had nights before where you got to sit there and twitch that thing. We've had other nights where you can just sit there and just hold it. You drag it, and every once in a while you're tapping bottom. But most nights I just kind of that natural rhythm that everybody will develop. Because when you first start off, you start playing, you don't know what you're doing, you're kind of changing stuff, and wham, you catch a fish. Your mind remembers all that. So when you turn your mind off, you go back to what naturally has worked. Once you develop that, most nights that's going to work for you. Tapping bottom. If you start losing bottom, let a little more line out. If you start pounding bottom, pick some line up. Pretty easy. You want to be tapping bottom. You don't want to be just thumping it. You don't want to be dragging it. But you want to be right down in that area. It gets difficult. You start, like if you get up in the lake and you start cutting, up the Canadian shoal or, all that stuff in and out of the channel, you're letting a lot of wire down, you're letting a lot of wire up. It's work. It's super productive stuff. Bait-wise, when I'm hand lining, I am almost always running F7 or Palace. Almost always. I love Mark's Little Spoons, and I will run those if I'm out there in the daylight. Once in a while, I will run a Mark spoon on the bottom and a Rapala on the top. But typically, it's a pair of F7 Rapalas. A handful of years ago, when the fish were real small, I'll run the 5s. If I'm going to try it earlier in the spring, because whatever reason there's not a bunch of guys in all the holes that night or something, I might run a 9, but 7s produce numbers, guys. If you want to go out there in the summertime and run a handful of 11s, that's great. You'll still catch some fish. You won't catch as many, but they'll be nicer fish, running them big old plugs. Me whipping, me hand lining, I want to get out there. I'd like to catch my 6, have a good time, and get back on my way, because it takes me an hour, like everybody else. Half hour in Black River and a half hour going back in Black River. So fishing trip gets long before you even get going. Color wise, once again, I just kind of brought a few things that produce real well. A vampire is tremendous. Clowns, purple-descents, hot steels, all that stuff works. These little tiny tin spoons, if you get out there first thing in the morning, these will work in the summertime, or right if you get out there a little bit before dark. You know, summertime, 9:30 is dark. If you get out there at 8 o'clock, you can pull those spoons. And if you can find the fish, there's a lot of days you don't hit dark and you're limited out and already going back in while everybody else is just coming out. I've done that many times. Plus, it's always fun to get into some sheephead and silver bass and everything else when you start running these spoons in that daylight. Big smallmouth perch. I've had some nice perch in my box.
What about the salmon? You get some salmon on the spoon?
I don't, because typically I'm not hand lining that time of year. Typically come July, I mean that's for me, 4th of July weekend, prime going. July all through August, that is the best hand lining you're gonna have. I did it a couple falls ago quite a bit. Got lucky, got a deer early, got to play with that. It was very productive, but I don't like my hand getting cold and wet. In the summertime when it's 80 degrees out at night or 75 and that water's 65 and I get my hand a little wet, it doesn't bother me. To go out there when everybody else is whipping and all of a sudden my hand's gonna dip in the water, I'm not a fan of that. It gets pretty cold pretty quick and then I'm miserable. The fun of it's taken away. Later in the year, stubbies, which are ancient, little wood hand roll plugs, everybody and their brother used to make them. August, these things work great. A lot of the newer guys are all going and running rabble rousers. I got some in the box. I don't really care for them. I know a lot of guys pull a lot of fish on them and do very well on them. It takes a pretty special night for me to even have to get carried away enough to go to a stubby. Typically my Rapalas, if I go through my 6, 7 colors of Rapalas and the handful of spoons I like, I already got my 6 by the time I get going through a couple of those. It's very productive, guys. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. If you got a bunch of rabble rousers, go out there and try them. If that's what's working for you, run them. There's no sense in not running them if that's what works. What do we got going now? Once we get down there, you're going to feel that bottom tapping. Guys, when a fish hits, it's meat fishing is what everybody calls it. I'm sure everybody's heard it called that meat fishing. You get a 4-pounder that hits that thing, guys, it's peeling wire out of your hands. It is a riot. You can feel him hit. A 13-incher, when he comes in and smacks it, I mean, that thing, take your time. Once he hits, you got all night to get him in. Just hand over hand on your wire. You're just pulling that in nice and slow. Keep steady pressure on it, make it constant, pulling that line in. The reel's going to retract all your line for you. Once you get up to your shank, first thing you're going to do, just grab that sinker and you set that inside the boat with you. You grab your top leader. If there's no fish on your top leader, that line goes over top of your head so that it kind of swings on the outside away from your other line. That means your fish has got to be on the bottom of you. Same thing, this is going to be like this. This line's over top of your shoulder, you got your bottom leader. You're just going to take it slow, pull them in. This is where that mason comes in really nice. It's real thick, you can get your hands on it easy. Pull them in, you're pulling them in, you're pulling them in. Another thing I found nice about that little swivel, you hit that swivel, now you know you're only 4 feet to the fish. You know he's right there. You grab just a little past that swivel, and all you're going to do is pull him up alongside the boat. Just a nice, easy swing. When I'm swinging on the bottom, I'm going over top of my top lead and everything. Pull them over on my top. I'm not very nice to my hooks. A lot of times I'll just grab that line, have them like that, and pull it. If I peel a hook, I peel a hook. As long as there's still one of those trebles on there, I'm good enough for that night. I'll change it out when I get home. I don't want to be fussed with it. Peel them off, throw them to the bottom of the boat. I just grab that leader, I go back over top of everything, I'm back in the water, feel it, plugs, you can feel it, the paddle swimming. Just go, set that baby back in the water, you're fishing. If he's on my top lead, I just leave my bottom lead, just dangle, don't do anything fancy with it, pull him in, over top of everything, gets fish off, throw it back in. Once again, don't use a net. Honestly, don't think I've ever netted a fish while hand lining. Lost some really big ones. You get them up next to the side, and it's like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this thing, but you know, a walleye like that, unless I'm tournament fishing, I got no use for them. They're pretty, hey, take a picture. You know, you gotta have that story of the one that got away, otherwise, you know, where would we all be at? What else we got going here? Like I said, when you're fishing the river, you're fishing the lake. When you're fishing the lake, you're more or less actually trolling like you would if you were salmon fishing. You're kind of moving, you're kind of going places. You're heading north, you're heading south, you're cutting in, you're cutting out. That's all stuff when you're north of the Coast Guard. When you're fishing the river, the current's a little bit stronger. You're really not making much headway up to the north. You're more or less just slipping the current side to side. You're just cutting that motor. So you're coming in, going out. Cutting into the shore, coming off of the shore. You're just, all you're doing is slipping. You're not really making any progress. You slip in, you slip out a couple times. You know there's a hole there because you whipped it, you marked it on your graph. You don't catch fish in there. Slip in tight to shore. Head up to the north because there's a little bit less current up there. Typically when you're inside, you make a little headway. Putts up to your next hole, slide in, slide out. Once you find the hole that those fish are in, you can pull your 6 or your 12, you know, real quick. You slip in, you come in. Typically, it's as soon as you start cutting back out towards the middle of that river, bang, you got a fish on. Get them in, you're out there in the middle of the river playing around, you're not harming nothing. Slide back in, get close to wherever your hole's at, you start kicking back out and the fish grab it. Make 6 swings like that, 40 minutes, you're done. If you get lucky enough to stumble on that as the first spot you hit that night, easy, quick, done, over. You're at the cleaning station, it's 10 o'clock. It's good night. Like I said, in the lake, you're kind of making headway. You get down towards the Coast Guard, you're still kind of slipping. You get up past there, it's just free range trolling. A lot of guys ask me speed. I've always been asked speed. I'm old school. I hate having the graph even on when I'm hand lining. I've been out there enough. I know where the pockets are. I know where the divots are, the trenches. I typically don't even have my graph on. I have turned it on just so I can answer that question. Most places I'm at about 1820 when I'm free range open trolling. In the river, like I said, you're actually not making any headway. I've always heard go out your line at 45, blah, 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 blah. That's what's working, guys. The nice thing when you're hand lining is you can feel that you're at bottom all the time. If you got to speed up, slow down a little bit, some nights, you got to go slow. Just putts along, putts along, putts along. When you get close to your hole, give it a little gas. Boom, oh, he just snapped onto it. Other nights you get where he's at and you got to stop. I've had nights before I was out there putzing along, hand lining, and I'd feel that fish hit it and I'd always miss him. Dang. After about the 8th one, I'm sitting there and I missed him. So I just opened up, free spooled line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Grabbed that line. He hit that thing and it started floating up and he must have thought he stunned it. Come back. As soon as I grabbed a hold of it again, boom, there he is. And all 6 of them I got that night was that exact way. I had to miss 20 of them. But once I got that keyed in, just let that wire slip, 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 grab a hold of it, and he'd be committed to it.